Jamal Murray got the bag. Jamal signs his max contract with the Nuggets, as we said that he would. We'll talk about what that means for Jamal. Is the pressure on him now? We'll talk about what it means for the Nuggets, about his relationship with Jokic in the front office and how to build with and without Aaron Gordon, all those things. Plus, because we're sickos, we're going to talk about Trey Alexander and how much he's going to play. All that and more on World's Finest on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us, making us your first listen, checking us out Monday through Friday. We do appreciate the support, whether you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, or at youtube.com/LockedOnNuggets. Hit that like and subscribe for us and let us know that you support the show. Hit us in the comments and let us know what you think about Jamal Murray's max extension and whether the pressure is on him or the front office with this deal. We'll talk about that on today's
Why not both?
Today's show. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, joined by Adam Mares of DNVR. On today's show, third segment, we're going to talk about Trey Alexander because, well, he's probably going to play because of where the roster's at. And Adam and I think are a little bullish on Trey Alexander. We're going to talk about him a little bit. But we start today, Adam, with the big news over the weekend. Jamal Murray agrees to a 4-year, $208 million maximum contract extension. The agreement was brought with the Nuggets with Jeff Schwartz and Mike George. Got to make sure we get the agents in there. Got to make sure that they get credit for it publicly because getting their cut of $208 million isn't enough. Adam, give me your immediate, instant reaction when you heard the news that Jamal was signing the max extension.
I mean, we knew it was going to happen. It would have really been surprising if they didn't get it done before media day, before training camp. And the longer it, I really think that if it didn't happen over the weekend, I think the pressure would have turned up, actually. Like at some point it would have really started to turn up. You get 3-4 days away from media day, it starts to get there. But I think this week it started to become a conversation. So I think it played out in something of a predictable manner, that Denver waited basically through summer and then did the deal. So I wasn't too surprised. But, now that it's done, I've been saying this, and you and I are a little bit different in this one regard. I'm not the most optimistic about Jamal, but I'm also not the most pessimistic. And Murray has been getting beat up all summer, rightfully so. He's looked terrible. For me, when I saw the deal, there was a little bit of relief and excitement, to be honest with you. And I think that has been the case. It's a little surprising even to myself because I've obviously been pretty down on him. But my initial emotional response to it was like, all right, that's our guy. Let's see what he's got. Lot to prove, a lot on his plate, but I'm excited to get started.
So I think it's interesting from the perspective of you don't have to answer that when the question is up, right? When it's like, are you going to extend him? What are you going to extend him for? Then the pros and cons are kind of debated. But now you don't have to worry about it. Like it's a known quality now. Like you have Jamal, he's on a max contract. We'll talk in the second segment about how tradable that contract is or isn't, and how to make it tradable in time. But I do think it's an interesting element just to be kind of like, okay, like we know that it's going to be Jokic and Jamal. And so going forward, you build around Jokic and Jamal because you're locked in to this kind of money. I do think that there is an element here where some contracts are like, oh no, they just like re-signed him. And it was like, yeah, he's just like around and he's the guy. And then there's contracts like, and this is not to compare the two because Jamal's won a title and hasn't accomplished more in his career, but like Tobias Harris, where the contract came to kind of define who he was for the Sixers, where he was supposed to be this third guy. And it wasn't just that he wasn't the third guy or good enough as the third guy. It was the money. It was the contract. And like, it just kept coming over and over and over again. Now, Jamal's already been on a max contract, so I don't necessarily know what changes here, but I do.
But half of his max contract, he was on the max contract for 4 years, and half of that he was injured. Like Jamal Murray really only had to answer for, if you think about it this way, first 2 years of his max extension, he's hurt and isn't in the playoffs. You can't criticize him for that. Third year, he wins a title. You celebrate him for that. Fourth year, he comes up short and everybody criticizes him. So he actually hasn't had to face the music on that. This is the first time he's had to. If things happened in reverse, it'd be a little bit different, but nobody had he didn't face any of that music because he didn't go through it.
That's a good point. That's a fair point as far as that goes. I think we were talking about this before the show. I think it's the most interesting question. So you're of the belief now that the biggest impact on this, as far as Jamal goes, is you think that there's a level of pressure that now comes with this contract for him.
I absolutely think there's pressure. I mean, in the NBA, everybody knows how much everybody makes. And if you make more than somebody else, like there can be a very quick resentment for, well, he's the guy with the max. He's the guy that's supposed to be doing this. And I think Jamal, and to your earlier point here about, what we just talked about those last 4 years, there's never been a moment in time where it's felt like, hey, one guy is supposed to be carrying us there and one guy is letting us down. You could say a little bit of that with Michael Porter because he's also on a max. But I think now it just comes down to this season, Jamal Murray will likely be line item number one in criticisms whenever the team is underperforming. And that just comes with an extra level of pressure of, you don't want to be the guy that ruined a team's chances because you got overpaid.
Okay. I think it's sound logic. I don't necessarily know that it applies to Jamal. I think he's so contrarian in kind of his approach that I think he's driven by different things than we kind of perceive, because look, the pressure's been there for him to be an all-star year after year after year, and he hasn't come out shooting flames. He hasn't come into camp like in amazing condition, like looking like the best player.
But I think he thought that was acceptable.
And I don't know. I think that it's always interesting to me how players respond. Like Jaylen Brown got the deal, and Jaylen Brown was like, I have to live up to this contract. And there are players that do that. Like there's a lot of players in the NBA that when they get paid, they're like, I get paid as a max contract, hundreds of millions of dollars. I need to live up to that. Like I've got to reach that bar. I have to push myself further. And then there are guys that are like, yeah, I got paid that much because that's how awesome I am. And I don't need to change anything, and I don't need to shift anything, and I don't need to do anything different. I know who I am. And with Murray, he's had two, for Nuggets fans, iconic playoff runs, right? One resulting in a championship. And that question of, are you being paid because of what you're expected to be? Or are you being paid because of what you've proven you are?
Ooh, what do you think for him?
I think it's proven what you are. His entire ethos has largely been like, you've seen the guy that I am in the playoffs. You know what I do in the playoffs. And even this year, even with how the playoffs ended and the heat pack and everything, he's still got the Lakers series.
Yeah.
And so like that's me.
I mean, yeah.
Now look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Jamal comes into media day and is like, I understand the expectations and the weight that this is, and it changes my perception on what I want for the rest of my career. But based off of like my experiences covering him, that's not the impression that I get. I don't feel that he will feel like there's an immense amount of pressure on him. I think he'll be like, yeah, they paid me a max because did you see what I did 2 years ago? I'm an awesome player.
I honestly don't think it'll be that. And part of this is, we're not the only ones saying this, Matt. Like, it'd be one thing if the team-specific podcast, the team-specific beat reporter was saying it, everybody else was saying it. But I think everybody is on this. I mean, it's a national storyline about Jamal Murray and just how good is he really. And I think this is an Emperor has no clothes moment where he's always gotten away with that. Yeah, I'm whatever in the regular season, but you guys know what I do in the playoffs. The first moment that wasn't true, the whole mystique disappears. It all goes away of this. It doesn't matter. I always show up in the clutch. You don't do it one time and it's like, yeah, well, now we don't know. Now what you are in November might be what you are in April, May, and June. And that's why I think there is a pressure on him. And I don't think he can get away. Like you're right that he hit those game winners. And it was honestly what I thought during those game winners I was like, well, this is just Jamal. You got to live with it because he just is that guy. But because he got so thoroughly dominated, not just struggled, but dominated in that next series, that to me, I think it's now a thing of like, no, listen. And because the team was so tired in large part, because I think they were carrying it. We all saw the memes that went around social media of, oh, Murray's out enjoying his time while his exhausted teammates are fighting for seeding. I just think that all of that disappears now with Jamal. And it's not a thing that is this abstract thing. I think it's a heavy cloud that probably sits inside that locker room of, we all know we need Jamal all the time. He needs to help out and carry his weight.
We'll talk more about this because I think it's a really interesting conversation. We've found something really interesting here. So we're going to talk a little bit more about it. Plus, we'll talk about how the Nuggets respond with Jamal's new deal, with him being locked up. We'll talk about that and more up next here on Locked On Nuggets. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we've got something different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. I had that on today. They have a new feature where you actually get to choose your multi-view, so you can specifically pick the games that you want to have on. So I was able to put like a 3-box on one TV and had Red Zone on the other, and the big screen had one of the main screens. It was awesome. It was absolutely phenomenal. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And if that's not enough, FanDuel also has something special for our listeners this weekend. Be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel. Double your winnings all the time. You make sure to check out all their promos. I have so many promos on FanDuel this weekend. Gotta push on Seattle -6. That backdoor diving spinning cover by Bo Nix.
That was a good drive. That was a good drive. That was a good drive.
That was a really good backdoor drive that the Seahawks let them have. So you can do check out all that and more on FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back here on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us, making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us, making us your first listen. Make sure to make Locked On NBA your second listen. You can catch me on Tuesdays with David Ramil, and on Fridays you can catch Adam with Wes Goldberg. Check it out all throughout the week. Great shows Monday through Friday on Locked On NBA. So I think this is really interesting because for you, it's like, okay, they gave you the extension, and now it's like you're expected to perform at this level because you're right. Everybody does know what everybody else makes. I guess my question though, Adam, is what's different from the situation now versus where it was under the previous max contract outside of the time where he was injured?
There's a rule in the NBA called the Allen Houston rule. And it's named because the Knicks gave Allen Houston so much money, it crippled him. And it's like, we can't do this anymore. We have to make a rule that's called that. We have Hack-a-Shack. That's a rule that is because, hey, he couldn't make free throws and teams were hacking him, and we have to make it. You make it name. You never want something that is a rule after you. If he underperforms on this one, it'll forever be known, whether it becomes a league rule or not, it'll forever be known as the Jamal Murray rule. Ooh. Never give 2 max contracts to a player who's never made an All-Star game. He's the only player in history not to get a second max contract without making an All-Star game or All-NBA. So you look at that and you go, that's the territory he's in. That's tough. That's a tough category. You never want to be the first or only in NBA history. So for me, I just think it's unprecedented. And then on top of that, you add in Russell Westbrook. Like, I just think he is one guy that probably likely will be breathing down his neck all year to say, hey, man, $52 million. We were all in the gym at 6 a.m. to get in a lift in. We all stayed a little bit late to get some shots up. $52 million. Get back out here. If it's needed. Hopefully it's not needed, but if it's needed.
It'll be amazing if he responds to this and like does become an all-star and like raises his game and like what a great story. Like I don't ever want to write Jamal. I will say this about him. He's not a guy that I necessarily want to just be like, I don't want to write definitive stories and just be like, okay, he is this and that's it. Like there's some guys in the NBA where you're like, yeah, this is who he is. And Jamal has been, the roller coaster has been extreme with him, where it's like, I'll go ahead and reveal this. Like prior to the bubble, I texted you and a few other folks and was like, man, if this doesn't go well, I think Jamal's getting traded. Like, you got to have a guy step up.
It's true, though.
And then he has 50-point games.
Yeah.
Like, and it seems like, and on the flip side of that, we all did. I sat down before the Lakers game 1 this playoff run, and I looked at Ryan and Blackburn next to me, and I was like, what if, I was like, everything is built off of Jamal. You know, we know what Jamal's going to be in the playoffs. And I was like, what happens if he's not? And he was like, well, he's going to be. And I was like, well, but what if he's not? And they got past the Lakers, but it does kind of present this big question mark of like, every time that you're out on him, he has those moments. And every time he has those moments and you believe in him, it's like, where did he go?
Yeah.
And that balance, I think, is, and that to me is the big thing with the max contract, is you're expected to be consistent, right? Like, you're expected to be there every single night.
It's really that more than anything else. Yeah.
They're not paying him $208 million just for him to have some great games in the playoffs.
Yeah. And he was good last year, by the way. Like, some of the advanced metrics had it as his best year by a good amount. Like, I actually think it was underrated what a good season he had last year.
Yeah, I agree.
And I would even say the 2 game winners that he had against the Lakers and the closing moments he had, especially in game 2, but really in games 2 and 5, the closing moments he had tell me he is that guy still. And even last year he was. The problem was not his ability to rise to the occasion in the playoffs. His problem was he was injured. And he was injured, in my opinion, because he wasn't in the best peak performance. And that's one of the stories of his career, is that he has often put himself in position to be vulnerable to injuries because of that. He hasn't been in peak physical condition. So to me, I actually think last year is encouraging in a Jamal is that guy when it matters moment. It's just that his floor had fallen so far below what it should have been at the playoff level that he had so far that we would have to rise. I mean, Denver won 3 in a row in the middle of that series. They got blown out in games 2 and 6. There was no fourth quarter magic to be had for Jamal Murray, right? They were down by 30 points. So I think that is really the story. And, that's why it's not even a skill thing. It's nothing else. It's an approach thing. It's a responsibility thing. And that's why this is such a compelling story.
There's a couple of other ways I want to kind of poke at this extension. And I think one of them for me, I did want to mention briefly, is, Jokic, I think, plans to stay in Denver for the entirety of his career. You never know what's going to happen, but I think that's the plan, but from all sides. And this extension does make it more likely that he's going to play that duration with Jamal. And Jokic and Jamal have always been very supportive of one another. They've spoken highly of each other, of their chemistry. They've obviously won a title together. I do think that I am interested to know your kind of thoughts on, does Jokic even think about this? Does he have to consider it? Because from a certain standpoint, it's just like, hey, this is your guy. Like, no matter what happens, and he's always been very complimentary of Jamal. They've always been on the same page publicly. But Jokic and Jamal have to be on the same page because that contract's untradeable and Jokic isn't going anywhere. So that combination kind of means this has to work.
Yeah, and honestly, it is the better story, right? You want to see a long-term arc where there's the same core pieces. It's just more compelling. It's more interesting. You don't want all these different iterations of a team. I mean, look at Kevin Durant's career arc, significantly less compelling than a Dirk Nowitzki or a Kobe Bryant. So you want to see the continuity of players that get to play together, these duos, and you want it to work out. So, but absolutely, they're tied to it. I mean, I hate to say this because I don't even like speaking these things into the world, but at this very moment, it almost seems more likely that the Nuggets would lose Jokic than Jamal, because Jamal would have to elevate his game to be tradable at the moment. Whereas Jokic could just look at a team and say, yeah, it's not going anywhere and you're handcuffed here. Again, I don't think it'll fall to that. And I don't even think Jokic would be a guy to do that unless it was an absolute disaster, which I don't expect. But nonetheless, you look at it right now and just say, I don't know that Jamal Murray's going anywhere for the next 5 seasons.
I think he's untradeable for the next 2 seasons. I think after that, I think he's more tradable than you are. I think
you're probably right, though. I mean, crazy trades have happened. You're probably right.
It's not just the crazy trades, though. I think if you're another team, let's say that the Orlando Magic kind of stay where they're at, right? And they got Franz and they've got Paolo, and they're a good defense, but they're really inefficient.
No star guard.
Guard, right? Yeah. And they look at Jamal Murray, if things were to go sideways and Murray was to become available, as I just think that front offices would be like, look, I've seen him have absolutely massive playoff games. he does have good overall numbers, and he's always had to play number 2. Like, what happens if we kind of unlock him? Like, if we buy in on him, what does that look like here? And I think that more teams would probably take that shot, or to put him in a, to take a shot as him as a Tyrese Maxey, right? As like a number 2 next to another type of player. I think that contract's a little bit more tradable maybe than we're acting like.
Again, we're just talking about a max contract with an ACL injury in his past, several other little bumps and bruises in his past, and zero All-Stars. I mean, you're right. Look, a lot of bad players have gotten traded. Andrew Wiggins, and it worked out. Like there have been bad contracts, and so untradeable is definitely an overstatement. But at the same time, there's like, okay, he's actually tradable, and you're like, yeah, well, what even at best case scenario is the market? 2 or 3 teams are interested, but they're not wanting to give up too much. Like, now you're talking about putting yourself in a tight spot. Like, in your scenario, they like Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. So you're getting back Jalen Suggs and Gary Harris and Jonathan Isaac, who's a great player, but a huge risk. Like, you're getting back a platter of players, not necessarily another star. So
doesn't this kind of this is kind of where I want to get to, is instead of the pressure being on Jamal, to me, this shifts the pressure to the front office, because now it's like, you got to make this work. If that contract is not movable for equal or better return, and you're tied to it for this duration at this price point, you've got to make it work.
Don't you think that they know that though?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they think they can. I think in large part, it's like, we've got Jokic, and we know that the 2-man game works, and so we can figure out from there. Like, isn't that kind of a part of how the front office has kind of approached things? And quite honestly, the coaching staff as well. I'll say that as well. Like, the organization as a whole, coach, front office, ownership, has largely been like, well, we have Nikola, and that, like, everything else we'll kind of figure out around the edges, which is like what makes this decision really interesting, because we're all of the opinion, a consensus of like, well, there was no other option. You couldn't lose him.
Yeah.
You can't replace him. You have to keep him. And that doesn't necessarily vibe with the idea of like, well, you have Jokic, so you can figure it out. So which is it, right? Did you need Jamal Murray, or did you not?
You definitely need him. I think, like, if the Nuggets signed, or let's say when his contract is up, the Nuggets signed Jokic to another max contract extension, they would go out for drinks. They might buy a vacation home. They might celebrate and do all these different things because it'd be a relief. I have to imagine Calvin Booth, maybe even Stan Kroenke, Tommy Balchettis, the entire front office. I have to imagine they went home, took some antacids, went for a long walk, maybe attended midnight mass. Like, I don't think it was a party. I think it was like, well,
okay,
our life's in your hands now. And you think about it, this is why I say when Jamal has pressure, and again, everybody's personality is different, but not only is there that pressure about this or that, but you also have to know that in some way, Michael Malone's fate is tied to you. Calvin Booth's fate is tied to you. Nikola Jokic's legacy is tied to you. Like, that's what I say. I just think he has pressure that if he goes bad, he'll wake up next summer and look around, and a lot of people won't be there, not because they didn't want to, but because they're like, yeah, Murray ruined all your guys' careers.
Up next, we're going to talk about Trey Alexander, because we have some questions about whether or not what kind of role is Trey going to play this season? And here's a good question. Will Trey Alexander play more or less minutes than a player who is not currently on the Nuggets roster? We'll talk about that up next here on Locked On Nuggets. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something you love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you like, or was that lost in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. What's something that you want to learn? Me, it's languages. I just really want to learn all these types of languages.
Which one?
I Spanish, Italian, and I really like to learn German as well. I don't know that there's like any list. I don't know there's a language I wouldn't want to learn. Like, if I had enough time, I would just want to learn all of them. Also, like, during the pandemic, I really got into woodworking, and that's fallen off because it was a pandemic thing. I need to get back to doing that because it was really satisfying. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back to school era can come at any age. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Final segment here on Locked On Nuggets for Monday, World's Finest. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. Check out youtube.com/LockedOnNuggets and give us a like and subscribe over there. We are, how many days is it until opening night?
Somebody said 47, so I'm going to go with that.
That's crazy. It's right around the corner, my man. We're
7 weeks.
We're almost there. All right, let's talk a little bit about Trey Alexander. So you brought this one for our pre-show discussion, and it was an interesting point that you made where you're like, I actually think he's probably going to have to play. Can you talk a little bit about why and what the reasoning is?
Well, why is because there's no point guards on the roster. There's Jamal Murray, who missed 23 games last year. There's Russell Westbrook, who's 36, and there's nothing else. So, if one of those guys is out for a game, does Denver call up Trey Alexander if he's not local and get him to play? Probably not. They probably run Christian Brown at backup point guard and just play without one, or get Julian Strawther brings the ball up. But if you get any kind of injury where it's like, hey, Russell Westbrook's out for the next 8 days, they say it's a hamstring and it's going to be a couple games. I just think he just gets called up and he has to play because, one, you need the shooting. Denver is low on shooting anyway, so you might actually need him even without that, just of a, hey, let's try it because he can shoot. You need ball handling, and then you need point guard play, which I don't think he's an NBA point guard caliber player just yet at the point guarding part of it. But he does handle the ball and he does shoot. So I just think he's going to have to play just on a numbers game.
I looked up his college numbers in Synergy, and there's like a lot to like about him as a playmaker. He was actually 79th percentile country across all Division II, built on his pick and roll play, including passes. So like he was really efficient from that model. And like when I looked at some of his plays too, it's actually really good. So like I actually think that Trey's got more creativity and more shot creation. My question for you is this:
the NBA jump though, Matt.
Yeah,
don't you think?
Oh, for sure. My question for you is this: if he doesn't play, what's the reason he doesn't play? What holds him back?
I think it would be the point guard play. I think it would probably be that. I mean, defense is the easy answer here, right? It's really hard. He's not the biggest guy. He's probably going to have to get stronger. Although I looked this up. Him and Jamal, same height. Jamal 6'6" wingspan. He has 6'10" and a half wingspan. His arms are actually significantly longer, notably longer than Jamal Murray's. So he's got that going for him. But so those would be the reasons not to play, or just Michael Malone's rotations. He wants to stick with some of their older players, which would be understandable in this case. But I will say this, back in 2023, Thomas Bryant, deadline deal, played 205 minutes. Reggie Jackson, deadline deal, played 319 minutes. That same year, Peyton Watson only played 186, and Davon Reed played 315, just for reference. So Davon Reed played about as many as the two guys that came over. Peyton Watson played less. I'm going to go ahead and say, oh man, this is tough because I think Denver's more likely to make a trade this year at the deadline for an impact player. So I'll say player not on the roster, but I think both player not on the roster and Trey Alexander play more minutes than Peyton Watson did that year.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that, which is wild given where Peyton is right now. Peyton's leap that season was really incredible. He came back from the G League and it was like, whoa, it was really amazing. Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll say player not on the roster. I just feel like they're going to eventually get into a spot where they're like, yeah, we got to add another guy and somebody comes available. So I'll go ahead and go that direction. It does kind of illustrate though, again, like how thin the rotation is, to your point here, that it's like, well, it might have to be Trey Alexander, because if it's not, we don't really have another option. And I do think that's concerning. I do want to ask, go ahead.
Can I give you this one real quick on the same topic? What are the odds Malone, after not playing him last year, this year's like, all right, Pickett, look, we're playing Pickett. We're playing him. Like now he's getting his opportunity, and not Trey Alexander. And Pickett goes out there like Theon Greyjoy, just completely shook.
The Jalen Pickett saga has been something. We've been on a we've been on the journey of the Jalen Pickett story has been something across this year and a half.
But do you think that would happen? That's actually a serious question. Do you think Malone would then just start shoehorning his minutes in, just as like, hey, you wanted me to play him?
No, I don't. I think he would still not play him.
Yeah. And which now feels like the right move.
Yeah, which is ugly. I do think that there's a possibility where Trey's really good, though. I do think like there's just a possibility. I think that he plays with so much confidence. That's gonna be a lot of it. And if he gets in the open runs and the guys feel like he fits and he's one of them and that he's a gamer they can trust, like he'll earn minutes. And I also think that the bar defensively might be a little bit lower this year than it was last year. I don't know why I think that, because like their post All-Star defense was really great, but I do think that as much as Malone's a defensive guy, I do think that there will be, because they're going to have to play Strother, and Saric they're not going to have rim protection in the second unit, and so I think to a certain degree it's going to have to be like, well, the bar's a little bit lower for how good you have to be defensively. Do you think so?
Probably just because there's fewer options. Like Julian Strother has to play. I can't picture Julian Strother getting benched. I can see his minutes being reduced, but I can't see him getting benched for bad defense because they don't have another option. They don't have anybody that can shoot the ball. So for him, yes. And then you go to like the backup power forward spots. Zeke, Vlatko, Hunter, again, they're going to have to play just because there's not a lot of depth. So I could even see a world where Hunter Tyson ends up playing more minutes than you think, just because it's like we need to put shooters on the floor and we just only have 3.
I do want to hit on this because I didn't get a chance to kind of comment on it, and I want to get your thoughts on it. You kind of touched on it with this. This is part of the whole conversation. So Zach Lowe made like waves were made from Zach Lowe saying like rumblings of discontent between front office and coaching, which is just really funny because it's just like I was very confused by this because I was like, we've been talking about this for months, guys. Like this is like there's zero surprise here. Like I legitimately am like, have I not been like, have I been too subtle? Did I not like, do I need to paint a big sign and hold it up that says that there's tension between Calvin Booth and Michael Malone because Calvin Booth wants to develop young guys and Michael Malone wants to win a championship, and like that there's tension there? I will just ask you this. Have we reached, I do think this, we might be reaching a point where now it's getting a little overstated, where like there's going to be I think there will be a deliberate pushback at media day to try and like, this is overblown. We're on the same page. Everything's fine.
Well, and not only that, I think that there's a lot of truth to it. Like, I think that this stuff probably reached its zenith towards the end of last year. I think that's where it was, and that's where it came out. What this is there are a handful of accounts, NBA Central, like a couple of these aggregating accounts, NBA Reddit, for example, that if things make it onto there, they just get big for whatever reason. And I think that's what happened is Zach Lowe, who, by the way, I went on his show 3 months ago and we talked about it. So
I know
it wasn't even the first time Zach Lowe had said it.
So, I know,
but for whatever reason, it got aggregated by some of those big Twitter accounts and just went big on Twitter, and so it became it got second life. But that's what I put out on social. It's not getting louder; it's just getting aggregated. I actually think that is not to say it won't rear its head very, very quickly if things go south this year, but I think that is a storyline from 3-4 months ago that really was about last year. And like the same with Jamal, the things of last year, I think, are not necessarily the things of this year. They might be. It might be the exact same scenario, but I think we really are in a full off season, fresh start. Everybody come back together with the same goal, and whatever differences, caused friction 4 months ago, or at least bedded down right now. And if they win, they'll probably stay bedded down.
So I get frustrated with Pollyannism from fan outlets, whether it's fans on Twitter or podcasts or whatever else, about like, no, this isn't a problem. This is all made up. This is not a real thing. When it's like, this is clearly a thing. Like there's clearly problems here. The difference here, I think, is that you and I, I think, are in alignment on this, which is like, yeah, no, there's tension. Yeah, no, it's not great, but it's also, it's like, it's not fatal. There's a difference between something being like, there's tension, but it's not like they're on the verge of blowing up and the entire organization is going to be a disaster zone.
Right.
Like that's not what it feels like. It doesn't feel like that. And I'm like, and if you're like, well, what would that feel like? I've covered the Nuggets when it felt like that.
Right.
When everybody was like talking behind somebody's back. Right. And that's not how this I think has been. And so
it's a championship team, man. There's tension.
Yeah. And there's tension there.
And I see Hurricane real quick. He says Calvin Booth wants people to think he's smart and Michael Malone wants to win games. Like, anytime you ever reduce anything into something that simple, I think you've probably oversimplified it.
Yeah, and like I oversimplified because I was like, well, Calvin Booth wants to develop young guys, and Michael Malone wants to win championships, as if like
Calvin doesn't
Booth
want
doesn't want to win
championship.
championships.
Yeah.
Like no, like
Calvin,
Calvin wants to win championships and thinks that the best way to do that is to develop young
Exactly.
talent.
Yeah.
And Michael Malone wants to win championships and thinks the best way to do that is what he's learned in coaching in the NBA for 30 years, but in very different leagues with different CBAs. So,
and I'm not going to share all this, but I will say there are people that Tim Conley and Calvin Booth have thought were going to be great in their different eras that turned out to be terrible. And there are people that Michael Malone thought were going to be terrible and turned out to be great. So like, if you really go through the, like where everybody had kind of placed their chips, a lot of them have some hits and some misses.
It's true. All right, it's got to wrap it up for Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. Swipe Up with you tomorrow. We'll be back on World's Finest on Wednesday. We'll have you covered throughout the week. We're getting closer to training camp. We'll start talking about what we're expecting from camp. We'll talk more about the news around the NBA. We'll cover all the comings and goings, all that and more. What?
Hurricanes had a real
Hurricanes on one. Hurricanes on one tonight. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys again next time here on Locked On Nuggets.